Hi everyone, welcome to the TriEssence martial art channel for another episode of Kung Philosophy, where we don't talk directly about martial art, but on other topics such as physics, philosophy, or maybe even gaming, and explain how these understandings can indirectly help your understanding and training and improvement in Chinese martial art. Before we start today's topic, I'd just like to tell my Patreon supporters that the reason I've been soft taping these series videos these days because Eric has been quite busy, but soon I will be able to get together and film those videos that I promised you guys that I will film to answer some of your questions that you messaged me privately. Okay, without further ado, let's go to today's topic, which is physics. More precisely, how physics is the missing language of Chinese martial arts. So before we discuss how physics is the language of Chinese martial art, first let's discuss a bit about language in general. Now you may or may not know that even though Homo sapien, that is us, has been around on Earth for roughly around 250,000 years, if we were to look at a graph that represents the advancement of human civilization, we will notice that for most of the times we were on Earth, pretty much nothing happened. And then around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, our civilization advancement starting to pick up pace, and in the last couple hundred years, it basically kicked into overdrive. Now we are not here to talk about the sprouting of modern technology and advancement, but rather we are interested in the dawn of civilization. Why did nothing much happen for over 200,000 years, and what changed 3,000 to 4,000 years ago that caused humans to start to have civilization and advancement? And one of the main reasons for that is actually the invention of writing. You see, long ago, without writing, one very smart Homo sapien could have come up with a very smart idea. But because there's no writing, he cannot record his idea down and pass it on to next generation. Maybe you say, why don't he just tell his offspring or others in his tribe? Well, maybe he did. But if you are familiar with the concept of the Chinese telephone game, where you get a bunch of people, you give the one person on the left, say, a message, and he passes on whispering to the next person, to the next person, to the next person. By the time you get to the last person who then announces the message out loud, chances are it's completely different from what the message set out to be. What this shows us is how unreliable it is to pass any message through word of mouth. And now imagine if passing a message in the immediate vicinity and time frame, just passing a few persons, can be so unreliable. Just imagine how much worse it would be trying to pass down an idea through word of mouth through a long period of time and over generations. So now not only are you dealing with the limitation of a language, which causes deviation in personal interpretation, which in turn causes information to change and deviate as it passes along different people. The moment you try to pass something down through a long passage of time, another issue comes into play, which is the unreliability of our memory. I'm sure most of us have the experience of clearly remembering something, an event or whatever that happened when we were a kid. But later on, when we actually go back and look at old photographs and other type of physical evidence, you realize that what you remembered actually wasn't what actually happened, which further undermines the credibility when we attempt to take any information or idea and pass it on using word of mouth through the passage of time. Which is why the ability to write things down is a very, very important step in the development of human civilization. And of course, even written language has its limitations, as pointed out by one of the most famous French postmodern philosopher, Derrida, who's famous for his theory of Deconstruction, in which he states that no matter how hard we try, our spoken and written language are inherently limited and flawed in the sense that we can never truly convey our actual feelings to another person, and in doing so we will never actually know if we are actually sharing the same idea as another person. But of course, this isn't a video on deconstruction. If there are people who are interested, maybe I'll consider making a future video that we're going to talk in detail about Derrida's deconstruction, which is one of the most interesting postmodern philosophies that I have studied back in college. Anyway, I digress. Back to my original point. So when things are passed through word of mouth, it tends to deviate. Which is why maybe sometime long ago, a Homo sapien had a very smart idea, but when it passed on to his offsprings or his tribemen, the idea changed and it became something else. Which is why civilization only really took a boost when people start to write things down, record things in hard copies, so that everyone can see the exact word used by the person who originally had this idea or discovery. Of course, according to Derrida's deconstruction, even written language are still limited and are subjected to misinterpretation, but it is still by far better than any congregation of population that does not have their own form of written language. If you look throughout history, all ancient civilizations have the invention of written language. In fact, strictly speaking, one of the qualifications for a civilization is to have a symbolic language that is beyond the natural spoken language, aka a form of writing. So any culture that does not have a written system of language, strictly speaking, can't even be considered a civilization. And these cultures often remain hunter and gatherers for thousands of years until they are invaded by other civilizations who are far more advanced in their social, cultural, and technological development. As a result, they will either turn into colonies or be sold into slavery and being exploited by these advanced civilizations. I digress. The point here is that there's a very clear correlation between whether or not a culture has a written language versus how advanced a given culture or civilization can become, which should give you a pretty clear indication just how important written language is to any group of congregated humans in this world. It would not be overstating the fact to say that written language is one of the most important keystones towards any development in civilization. Now that we've established just how important written language is to a civilization, so now how is this related to physics and Chinese martial arts? Well, the reason that Chinese martial art has been on a decline for generations, well, there are many other factors involved, such as people not willing to share their true knowledge, people teaching fake information, and they get passed down. I'm going to make a whole video about that in the near future. So besides those purposeful human factors that convoluted the knowledge pool, another very important reason or cause for the downgrading of Chinese martial art is the fact that a lot of these, in fact most of these old masters, don't have a very clear way to convey the idea and mechanic to the next generation. They might try their best to explain what they are doing to you, but because of the barrier of language that they have, you might not actually understand exactly what he's trying to say. Which is why a master might have 20 indoor disciples, only a few end up getting good because they are the ones by chance understood what the master is actually trying to say, while others might hear the same description but have a different understanding. And this is a very huge limitation to the passing down of correct knowledge in Chinese martial art, especially internal. Right? External martial arts have less issue with this because a lot of it pretty straightforward. You look at what the master do, if he's beating on an iron pellet, if he's punching wood, if he's doing kind of conditioning, you kind of can't go wrong with that kind of training. If you're doing push-ups, sit-up, not really an issue. Internal martial art, however, it becomes a huge issue because everything is an experience, it's internal, you can't see it. You can't measure it with a ruler. So how a master describes what he does and explains it to you really determines whether or not you can understand and do it correctly and eventually reach the same understanding. And from my personal experience, most of the time these masters are not good at explaining, and that including my own master. Well, my Tai Chi master, very highly skilled Taiji master. I have not met somebody who is better than him and have so much I can learn from him. But every time he tries to explain something, it's always very crazy. If you were to actually listen to how he explains what he does, it sounds like woo-woo. He'll talk about having a point over here, having a ball over here, something spins behind him, and you think, man, this guy is crazy. But that is his first-hand experience. That's not actually what happened, but it's what he experiences for him to make certain mechanic work. But does that experience help you in getting to his level of training? It depends. Some people might have the same experience, but a lot of them don't. And while you're trying to chase what he described to you as an experience, you're actually being led astray because you have a different type of experience. Which is why this type of teaching is less than ideal. So how do you improve this? Well, quite simply, by using the laws of physics. It is just like that our human experience and our human spoken language, even written language, are less than ideal and not nearly as precise in describing anything that requires accuracy, which is why mathematics is the true language of the universe. It can describe an idea, can describe a formula, can describe a phenomenon accurately and precisely and without personal bias. A mathematician, when he writes down an equation, another mathematician can see 100% exactly what he has in his head. There are no personal experience, there are no analogies, no anything that regular spoken or written language has limitations that can convolute an idea. Math distills everything in its purest form, which is why mathematics is the language of physics. Now, while in martial art, you might not actually need math because we don't need anything to be calculated meticulously to the decimal. However, having the understanding of laws of physics will greatly improve the chance of any knowledge of Chinese martial art being passed down to the next generation. I'll give you an example to better understand where I'm coming from. Recently I came across this video on YouTube about Wu Xing Tong Bei. And this guy traces back to the same founder, which is great-grandmaster Zhang Ce, where we share the same founder, we're part of the same system. But his Wu Xing Tong Bei, according to my branch's understanding and standard, is utterly bad.
经过几代通背拳传人博采众家之长，广泛吸收前人的优秀成果，并在以武会友、与人交手、换手的实战技击中创新发展变化而来。技击性强，朴实无华，富于实战，刚柔并济，浑厚自然。
There's a whole list of things that he's doing wrong, but let me just give you one example. When he's doing a downwards P, his arm is flimsy, floppy, and bent. Now, why is that bad? Well, quite simply due to two laws of physics. Firstly, leverage, and secondly, centrifugal force. And you might ask, what does that actually mean? With leverage, we should know that from the point of the lever that is acting upon, the further you are from that point, right, the more force you have. So if you imagine there's a point and there's like a stick here, right? Let me take my trusty pen. So if I'm this far away from here and I'm applying a force, it's nowhere near as great as if I'm that far away. So what does that mean? When I'm actually doing a downwards P motion from Tong Bei, if my arm is bent, then the hand is closer to my shoulder. If I stretch this arm as much as I can, then it's further. So simply leverage. Right? To put it simply, the further you are from the point of rotation, the greater the force. Okay, and that again goes to centrifugal. Right? When you're doing P, your arm is essentially almost like it's rotating. And when you're having a rotation, the further you are from the center of rotation, the more force the tip is generating. And of course, if I go a bit deeper, centrifugal force is basically not a force that spins in a circle, but a force that's constantly trying to escape the rotation. Right? The force is actually going out, but it's being pulled back by something, in terms of Earth and the Moon, it's gravity. In terms of our arm, well, it's the arm. So my hand is actually trying to go out, but my arm is preventing it from going out, and therefore, as a result, the motion becomes spherical. Right? That's centrifugal force. Alright, so in case you still not clear how leverage and centrifugal force is applied in this motion, let me try to give you a brief demonstration. So in the previous clip, you've seen that when he does with his 摔掌 or P, right? 摔 is like this, P is like that, his arm is bent. I mean, not to mention the floppiness of his arm, which obviously if he hits something, it's going to bend and not conserve the energy to go through and cause damage. But his arm is bent like this. He's doing this, and his P is also kind of like that.
经过几代通背拳传人博采众家之长，广泛吸收前人的优秀成。
Okay, so why is that bad in terms of laws of physics? Like I've already explained just now, if the shoulder is the center of rotation, then holding your arm like this, your hand is closer to your center of rotation than if your arm is stretched out. And based on the principle of leverage, you know, the further you are from the point of the lever, the more force can be applied. And of course, when it comes to centrifugal force, when something is rotating and spinning, then you know, when he spins like this, firstly, he's not actually following a perfect arc because his elbow is not fixed. So the hand actually moves, the distance switches, the distance between the hand and the shoulder, which is the center of the rotation, it changes all the time, and therefore it doesn't conserve good energy or force. Then secondly, of course, the further you are from the center of rotation, the more force you get. So if your arm is like this, you have much less force than if your arm is like that, right? So, and if you don't understand why, well, the further the point is from the center of rotation, the more distant it actually travels, right? So if I'm drawing a circle with my elbow bent and my hand here, you know, I don't know exact measurements, but this is a smaller radius of a circle, right? If you think this is the center and the hand is the edge of the circle, this is a smaller radius compared to if my arm is completely straight. And if you do some simple geometry, you will know that when you are further away from the center of rotation, then you are drawing a larger circumference. And what does that mean? It means that your hand is traveling a longer distance. And what does that mean? That means you're traveling faster because you're keeping the same speed of rotation, right? So if you're traveling a faster distance over the same time period, then you are traveling faster, and by traveling faster, you create more force. So you see, that's how it's all simple physics if you really just think about it. So what's the correct way of doing a sideways 摔掌? So instead of doing this, in my lineage we have to do this. You see, how this arm from here goes straight down, it's not bent. And how do we do a P? Simple. Here, like that. Instead of this, right? It's completely stretched out. We'll try to reach as far as we can, like I say, 指天画地. Like this. And the center 摔掌, instead of doing this, like that. So I hope that from this simple example you can see how even though we share the same founder, the same system, but because we're different branch and we receive different teaching, the execution is completely different. You know, if I were to imitate his motion, which he does something like this.
经过几代通背拳传人博采众家之长，广泛吸收前人的优秀成。
In us, I don't have much space, but it will be something like this. And hope that you can see immediately how, once you understand the principles of physics behind this mechanic, then suddenly it should make more sense which way is more efficient, which way create better result and hurt more when you hit somebody. So if this person in this video actually understood these two simple principles, then he will realize that when you're doing a P with arm bend, it's far less efficient than if your arm is completely straight. And you know, and this has been particularly mentioned in our system's classical text, right? This particular part we call 指天画地. 指天 means to point to the sky, 画地 means to draw on the ground. Okay, so here's the problem. It describes exactly what you should do when you really understand what you should do, right? When I see 指天画地, that means that when I have my arms up high, I'm trying to touch the sky, so the arm has to be as straight as possible. And when it comes down to the ground, I'm actually trying to draw a line on the ground with my finger. So therefore, as straight as possible. But if I tell you the same term, 指天画地, to someone who doesn't already know this principle, God knows what kind of interpretation he can come up with, right? And that's precisely the problem with traditional Chinese martial art method of teaching, that they say something, but another person might interpret it in a different way. And obviously not all classical texts are just hard to interpret, right? There are some things that are actually pretty straightforward, like in the Xingyi classic, they say that the elbow should not leave the rib. That's actually not something that you should interpret in an artistic way. It's plain simple, your elbow don't leave the rib when you hand it here, and when it does come out, it follows the line from the rib, right? Which goes back to the whole elbow drama that I had on my channel. The point is, not all classical texts are vague and confusing, but there are certainly those ones, such as 指天画地, that doesn't exactly tell you what you should do unless you receive the correct explanation. Now, of course, in both instances, if one were to understand the reason behind the description of the classical text based on the understanding of the laws of physics, then there are no room for misinterpretation, for error, or argument. Just like I've explained in my past video titled When Laws of Physics versus Idol Worshipper, I went into detail to show just why sticking your elbow out is bad given the way Xingyi does its punches. If just enough people understand these simple laws of physics, then there shouldn't even be an argument or drama over where the elbow position should be. It should be clear for all to see. Which further illustrates my point on how our default language is very limiting when it comes to describing precisely the mechanics of Chinese traditional martial art, whereas physics, on the other hand, can perfectly capture the essence of said mechanic without any room of error or doubt. Another point to take here is that more Chinese martial art people should really go learn some basic physics so that we can stop arguing over really dumb stuff. And in replacement, if the great Grandmaster Zhang Ce or whoever else in the system along the way taught people about leverage and the centrifugal force, then I'm pretty sure everyone would have a better idea of why arm need to be straight and how it is correct. So here is my point, right? If you can translate everything in internal martial art into laws of physics, then there are no room for error and misinterpretation, and everything will be measured precisely just like math. And in doing so, one will greatly improve the chance of this knowledge being passed on to the next generation. But unfortunately, right, people back in the days, and even today, most of the Chinese martial masters are not well versed in physics. In fact, most of them don't even know the first thing about physics. Even though some of them do talk using physics terms, after chatting with them for a while, I realized that they actually don't know what those terms actually mean. They just heard these terms, think it's hip to actually mention them, makes themselves feel like they're educated, but they have no idea what they're actually saying. And that is the problem, the majority of the Chinese martial art community doesn't know physics. Whilst in the West, a lot of people do like to invoke physics, but they don't actually have the right teachings. It has another problem. So what they think is the explanation from the physics perspective are actually wrong because they don't have the mechanic to begin with. And let's not forget those that do possess internal mechanics and understanding, but instead of disclosing the mechanics for what it is, they try to peddle magic and snake oil to people in order to attain monetary gains. Those people are also doing a very huge disservice for the overall development of internal Chinese martial arts. So what you need is somebody who already have the mechanic in them. They already do these things that internal martial art expect you to be able to do, and at the same time understand the laws of physics and can then look into themselves, see how I am achieving these results, and then explain them using the laws of physics. We need a lot more people like this in order to make this entire internal martial art topic less confusing, less convoluted, and easier to understand. And I believe if Chinese martial arts, especially internal martial art, were to have a brighter future and stop degrading every generation and losing knowledge rather than retaining knowledge and possibly even getting better every generation, then it is paramount for practitioners to be well acquainted with at least Newtonian physics, right? I mean, quantum mechanics, relativity, string theory, not really needed, but at least the very basic of Newtonian physics should be a mandatory study for current and future Chinese martial artists, especially those who wish to understand this better, train yourself more efficiently, and be able to pass that knowledge down to the next generation. And in doing so, we would also eliminate the risk of having woo-woo and utterly nonsense and wrong practice to pollute the community. Much like this whole elbow drama, where if you know the basic laws of physics, you will know that an elbow placement that is on the side with a linear forward combo punch, except from a horizontal straight punch, anything that's vertical or upwards, elbow has to come in, right? There shouldn't have even been a drama to begin with. There shouldn't even been fanboys defending him if all those fanboys actually just understand the laws of physics. But the sad reality is they don't. Instead of understanding physics, they buy into martial art like a cult. And that's exactly what we don't need in our community. There's already enough cult leaders and people who turn martial arts and profit from martial art by turning it into a kind of cultish religion, right? That would only spell doom for the future of Chinese martial arts. Everyone should really be more rational. Instead of worshipping an idol, look into the actual mechanics based on laws of physics and understand what actually is happening. As I've always telling people, as long as you're living on this earth, in this universe, no one can disobey the simple laws of physics. And whether any training is correct or incorrect, whether this classical text should be interpreted this way or that way, the ultimate judge should be the law of physics. Now, of course, when something contradicts the laws of physics, then there can be two things, right? Firstly, that particular practice or approach is wrong. Or secondly, you've been taught incorrectly, right? The original practice maybe isn't the way that you think it is. But either way, whether that style is made a mistake or whether it's your teacher that is wrong, laws of physics is a constant rule of measurement that doesn't change. Laws of physics can't be wrong. At least in this earth, on this world, Newtonian physics hasn't failed us since the day it was conceived. On the scale of human-sized daily interaction, which is relevant to martial arts, excluding quantum mechanics and so forth, which are only relevant to things at a very macroscopic level such as quarks, gluons, and particles. And if everybody can just measure what they do by laws of physics, then we will eliminate the problem of fake masters, of learning fake martial art, because any of those people cannot pass a simple test on the principles of physics. Now, just like the history of Europe, where people started in the Dark and Middle Ages, where religion limited people from everything, to the Age of Enlightenment, right? Renaissance, where science, logic, and reason start to prosper, I do hope that Chinese martial arts, which are currently pretty much in this Dark Age period, can also eventually reach an Age of Enlightenment, where everyone applies laws of physics and therefore eradicate majority of the fake information, wrong practice, and fake masters. Alright, that's all for today. I hope that has been interesting, and that if you never thought about pursuing on the basic knowledge of physics, that I have changed your mind, and that you realize how important physics is to Chinese martial art. Which is why in the title I said, physics is the language of Chinese martial art. In fact, it's a language that Chinese martial art is missing and desperately need. If you find my videos interesting, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. That will help me greatly. If you can support me on Patreon, that will be greatly appreciated. Because as you may or may not know, my videos are kind of niche. I mean, Chinese martial art is niche to begin with compared to other popular things like, K-drama, pop music, and whatnot. So it's almost impossible for a channel dedicated to Chinese martial art to get those kind of views. Which means the money I get from YouTube with people watching my videos is very, very little. And my channel is even more niche than most other Chinese martial art channels out there, because instead of talking about conventional, beginner-friendly, and super cliche and also boring topics such as showing off a form, teaching a form, showing some application, I choose to tackle much deeper and more complicated questions and topics within the Chinese martial art world, which one would only appreciate when they already have a decent understanding and experience in learning and practicing Chinese martial arts. I often tell people that I want to provide answers to questions that most people in the Chinese martial art community don't even yet know to ask. I mean, I could just go and also make cliche videos that most beginners want to watch, but then everyone's already doing that. And I want to do something that no one else is doing. And on top of that, I've spent decades wasting my time learning the wrong stuff, chasing the wrong tail. And after I've gone through all that and finally arrived at the correct answer, I wish to help others out there like me and eliminate the potential time-wasted attempt that they would have in their own journey of Chinese martial art, which is why my channel has always been trying to explain things that are deeper and more complex and yet not really appreciated by beginners. Therefore, if you do enjoy my videos, do consider supporting me on Patreon. And as always, a shout out to all my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for supporting me, especially during this pandemic, and let me know that there are people out there who do appreciate the knowledge and information that I'm sharing. And as always, feel free to contact me anytime for any questions about current content, suggestions for future content, or just any questions related to martial art in general. I can't help you with other areas in life, but Chinese martial art is something that I definitely can help you with. And if something I don't know, I have extensive connection to the Chinese martial community in China and abroad, and I'll definitely try my best to find them out for you. Lastly, I'd like to remind everyone, we're still in the pandemic, so keep your distance, wear your mask, sanitize your hands, stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks for watching TriEssence Martial Art channel, and I'll see you next time.